they're afraid that if I'm an Indian American and I go to a therapist that is of the same descent, then we've lost privacy. Is that something that you've come up against?
Oh, 100%. What would you say your child sees now, and what would you want to make better for them? I think that's the hardest piece for a lot of men, is it goes with the emotional expression.
And culturally, it's almost not only accepted, but celebrated, dare I say.
No one goes around saying, like, I'm just an angry person. Like, if you go ask people,
Yeah.
like, hey, tell me about yourself, no one says I'm an angry person. So they don't recognize it in themselves, right?
We're showing you, we've brought you here. We've done all these things. It's like all the language of love is, giving, doing, providing.
Sacrificing.
Martyring
almost.
Martyring.
Yes.
100%. And then words are fluff.
People really truly are doing the best that they possibly can, the best that they know how to do. But that doesn't mean we need to be permissive about it. And it doesn't mean that there's not room for growth.
Hey, Seema, it's Saturday and it feels like home because we are recording another episode at 9 a.m. on Saturday.
Yes. Finally back to our familiar routine.
Yeah, this is like our groove, when 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning and we're recording and we're talking to someone fantastic who's going to blow our worlds open and teach us a whole bunch of stuff, right?
It's one of the best parts about my life, honestly, I have to say.
Yeah, I love it. So who do we have here today? We've got someone who is an expert in a lot of things, but I think we're going to be talking about not only mental health, but how South Asians, and especially South Asian men, are progressing through modern day, and what impacts it's having on their mental health and what we can do about it.
Yeah. And, today we have Jyothsna Bhat, who's our clinical psychologist, our expert, and she has such a wealth of information to share. And I know we're going to get into some really interesting topics that maybe we don't always hear about. But I have to say, one of the things I love about her and how I know this is going to be a good conversation, as she was introduced to us by Nikhil Torsakar, who was also a guest on our show. You mentioned that you have this blog, but tell us all the things.
Yeah. So just really quickly, I consider myself, I was born in India, raised in England, then we moved to the Midwest. I can kind of consider myself, I guess, first generation, because my parents are immigrants, or I don't know how the designation is these days, but that's kind of what I would say. Grew up with scrappy sort of immigrant parents. Dad was, a professor at Washington University, which is where we ended up, me and my brother. And my mom, coming from India, she was, did her master's, but obviously she couldn't use that here. It doesn't always translate. So she had to find all kinds of different avenues for her career path. But long story short, going through school, it was, straddling biculturalism, as we all know, right? And I was pushed to do medicine. I did not end up doing that route, even though I thought I was supposed to do it. I just kind of went along with everyone else and, got into the pre-med route and failed in organic chemistry, or did not do well. And I realized, I actually have to think about what I'm doing right now. Like, this is not working out for me. It's funny nowadays, like, you ask kids, what do you want to do? And it's like, I don't know. I have no idea. And we're all like, that's wonderful. Take your time.
Yes.
Like, take another 4 years, and they're like a senior in college. And for me, it was like, you got to know what you're doing. Right.
Yeah.
So, and even now, like being a YouTuber or being like an Instagram influencer is like a legit career. For us. Like, none of that existed. So I had to figure it out fast, So my roommate was taking Psych 101, and I'm like, all right, let me explore. I felt very young and immature at that time. I just had no idea, just floating. In this fun school, very hard school, I should say, WashU. And I ended up in psychology, and that was it. It was a love connection, and just love exploring psychology, because I also come from a kind of a spiritual background. My dad was very philosophical, spiritual, introduced me to all the great teachers and leaders. Like Jay Shetty is like, I'm sorry, nothing about Jay Shetty's, but like, you can scratch that if you want. But like, but like the real people, right? Like the Aravind,
the
OGs, the Ramana Maharishis, like all those kind of.
Yeah.
And then my mom was very religious, so it was like a very interesting juxtaposition, backdrop of my life, and psychology just seemed to really fit for me. Just thinking about humans, and doing a service for human beings in a health capacity that wasn't medicine, but that was something really deep and connective. So I'm really glad that I did it. I love what I do. So that's a little bit about me and how I got into it. As that, moving to New Jersey, so we were in the Midwest all this time. So moving to New Jersey was where I started getting my first Indian clients. Like nobody was coming to me in Ohio. That was Lacey in the early 2000s. And, you move to Jersey and you start getting those people that start to trickle in. And I began to, see some issues, whether it was, shame and guilt about coming to therapy. I was getting a lot of backdoor approaches, like, hey, my mother's sister's cousin wants to talk to you. Can you just quickly sort of talk with her, point her in the right direction? She's having confusion, or she's not able to, get out of bed some days. I'm like, wow, this this is some deep stuff. And, I can't just necessarily I can have a conversation, but we need to think more about how to help you. And there was always that little bit of hesitation. What does that mean? What do you mean psychologist? What do you mean like psychiatrist? That's, that sounds like a lot. Can't we just you talk to them. You're like them. You're Desi American. You can share and give them some perspective and they'll be all better. So it was that kind of stuff. So then I'm like, wow, there's a lot of issues here. I feel like sort of amplifying some of this. So I started doing some writing for the National Registry of Service Providers, a little bit for NAMI. And then I'm like, I just was seeing so many things that I felt needed to be amplified. And then more recently, Psychology Today. So that's
that's incredible. So it's like almost like these people were coming to you thinking that you could just kind of have like a 15-minute conversation and then boom, everything would be fixed.
Exactly. And sort of having to do a little bit of psychoeducating as well as triaging. I'd have my medical professional friend together. We'd talk with them to be like, okay, doctor says, talk to a therapist. It's okay. It doesn't mean that this is going to be a black mark on your record. That was the biggest fear too, right?
Yeah.
Is this going to sit with my child for the rest of her life and her career? Is my husband's work going to find out about this? Those questions. So it was very interesting. And meantime, navigating my own sort of biases as well. We're learning along the way. So absolutely my own fears of like, what if I get a mental health illness and how do I, navigate that? And what will people think? Always that in the background, right? So,
oh my gosh, I love that you brought in that own vulnerability, right? That self sort of that you're navigating at the same time. One of the things that I really find myself hearing a lot of is, the Indian community where I grew up was very, very small. And so if somebody had a medical issue, right, like you'd go to the general practice, but then that uncle would say, well, you need to go to this other guy that's also a family friend that we see every weekend for your cardiology follow-up, right? And so kind of everybody knew everybody's medical history in that sense. And it's a very, I'll say, collaborative approach to medicine, which can be great. But I think what puts people off a lot of times, in my experience at least, is they're afraid that if I'm an Indian or Indian American and I go to a therapist that is of the same descent, then we've lost privacy. Is that something that you've come up against?
Oh, 100%. I will have people come to me first, second, third session. So this isn't going anywhere, right? I'm like trying to explain to them like HIPAA laws and rules and privacy. And I promise you, just because I'm like you or we have this connection, I still have a profession to maintain, a professional sort of level of discrepancy and all that stuff. So discretion, excuse me. So there would, there's not, there's always that question. Absolutely. Even today, I mean, like we talked about, right? Mental health is being talked about on many platforms now. The Instagram is talking about it. So many other platforms are talking about it. But it's still, when you talk get deep in the underbelly of the communities and like deep within families, there's still a lot of work to be done. There's still a lot of reticence. There's still a lot of hesitation to maintain therapy even, or like there's a procrastination now. I feel like they may admit that there's something there, but
Yeah.
it's like, oh, a procrastination to get the help and to move forward and that kind of thing. Or sort of to say, we'll just talk, have 1 or 2 sessions and be done. And
Yeah.
sometimes you need more. But yeah, so I mean, as far as the reason why I started writing, like I said, was there was so many issues, right, to bring up. Sort of, and stigma is a part of it, but like the family system was a big sort of kind of rising element in a lot of the issues. I was seeing young adults that were having strained relationships with parents. It's almost like, I like to say, all the intergenerational narratives and traumas and that kind of thing is sort of breaching the surface at this point in our lives. Now, like, Gen Xers, or, the ones that are the having the families and the kids and that kind of thing, and the trauma, not, I don't want to call it trauma, but the narratives and the scripts that they have dealt with and are bringing it forward to their children. That's something that's definitely significant, and their kids are now coming to me. Let me tell you how I actually it clicked for me. One day I was watching Russell Peters, and you guys probably know who Russell Peters.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I remember Russell Peters and just clutching my stomach, dying.
Someone's
laughing.
gonna get hurt.
Yes.
That guy.
He does.
He got a lot of money.
Yeah.
He does this one. He's an OG for sure.
Yeah.
But he does this one bit where he talks about his angry Indian dad. And he's like, why is he angry all the time? And I remember doing like some busy work while I was watching, and I looked up and I'm like, oh my God, genius. Like, a lot of these comedians are just, philosophers underneath, right?
Yeah.
He like nailed it. And I was like, that is a trope. And so I went back and I thought about it. My dad himself, very quick tempered, like little patience, like very exacting, disciplinarian, and that kind of thing. And sometimes my friends being afraid to approach him. And I remember my friends' dads, some of them, like you'd have the very happy uncle figure, but then there'd be the ones that you kind of scared of, like you couldn't talk to them. They were very like matter of fact and like didn't give you much. And so I was thinking about that. I'm like, wow, like that impacts everything. And I'm like, given it's a patriarchal society generally, but then in the South Asian layer, the South Asian dad figure impacts everything. And I was seeing it with my clients because, I have, examples, right? So like I had a client, I've scrubbed all this information, but
of course,
just quickly, a little thing, I call her Rena, young adult, came to me, significant depression, anxiety, marijuana dependency. She was probably in her early 20s, not even like 19, 20 in college, body image issues. And she was talking about how grew up in a completely like an abusive, chaotic household. Dad was very abusive to her. They were very high achievers. Mom was a doctor. Dad was also some sort of high up in the business world. And, in front of others, keeping it together, putting on a good front. Behind closed doors, there was like, he busted her lip. There was like major abuse stuff going on. And body, like he would tell her how, she was so thin. She was never going to be able to be a mom. She's not going to find anybody. Like terrible, terrible things. And then, so she was really like, he's a narcissist. I'm dealing with this all the time. And to give her comfort, I had to sadly admit that she's not alone, because I was hearing other stories about dads like this. Like it wasn't even like super shocking, which is sad. And I call that trope sort of the abusive dad, straight up abusive. I have another client, I'd say Sumi, who's in a relationship with a man who just completely loses his temper constantly. And she's kind of lost attraction to him. It was an arranged situation, but, she feels like she literally married her dad, who was always like this. And she's kind of lost, her nervous system is shot. So she's got a lot of anxiety, panic. She finds herself getting angry all the time. And her mom just keeps quiet, sort of tiptoes around him. And this frustrates my client to no end. At the time, she was very, very upset with her mom for doing this. And she's like, I'm not putting up with that with my dad. I fight back. And I'm not putting it up with this husband. But it's not doing their relationship any favors. So I kind of talk about like him as being like the sort of the snappy, quick to fight sort of South Asian male. And then we have another client. I just want to tell you what's out there right now.
Please
tell us
do.
the phenotypes. Tell us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then there's this guy client, I call him Ronak. His father also extremely, sort of abusive at the time, growing up, physically, mentally, emotionally. But now as an adult, he's sort of figured out like his way. He's made his own sort of life ahead of him, like his business and that kind of thing. And dad is trying to give him advice and like wants to be close and doesn't understand why don't we have a relationship? Why aren't you being like as cuddly with me as I see other sons and their dads? Like, and I don't understand what happened. And it's like, I call that the short-term memory dad or the gaslighting dad. Like, what? So that's an interesting thing. It's like, are you clueless? Are you truly clueless, or have you blocked it out? Is there guilt that how you've been relating to your son? And then I have another one where the client whose father has bipolar disorder, legit, like that's a problem. But that's not an excuse for being, again, emotionally angry with son all the time, comparing him to others, expecting a lot from him. This father was sort of a famous figure in his field, but he never approved of his son. So son now has a persecutory complex.
Okay.
Yeah. And he's always feeling like he's not good enough. So like sort of the disapproving father figure, always we're looking for that, not getting it. And so he's always looking for approval from authority figure. And then a couple where the husband was sort of following just sort of this exact script of his dad growing up, setting into the mode of work, barely showing up, sort of quickly having to run and take calls, sort of emotionally unavailable, not dying to be a parent, but was a parent, not really connecting well with his child, in a healthy way. Like no idea how to be a parent, first of all. That's a whole nother topic. I don't think anyone teaches, right? That's a whole nother thing. And I kind of call that the unavailable sort of South Asian male. Doesn't necessarily want to get into doing household things, but is like, she has to be like the mom. Come on, you got to do laundry. She writes a list. These are the things I need you to do. It's a lot of things happening.
I feel like I've recognized so many of these elements in people that I love, people that are amazing human beings, but you kind of see it, right? And then even culturally, it's almost not only accepted, but celebrated, dare I say, in things like, if you look at Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge, right? The dad is so like, this figure to be contended with. And the girls change their behavior if they know dad's home or coming home versus not being so carefree, or Amitabh Bachchan in many of his roles, like Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum, right? The whole thing, it's just coming through. So I know, Dinesh, you had a question, but it was just sort of a reflection on where we're at.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I do have a question now, but I was really just itching my beard. I hadn't put like beard oil in today, but okay. So, a lot of different phenotypes, right? Is that the right word? I think it's the right word, right?
It's kind of something I sort of pulled out themes. I'm going to say,
let's call it themes.
Yeah.
And in interest of time and having a conversation that could be the most productive, what do you think is the most prevalent perspective that we should approach today's conversation? And here's what I mean. Should it be from the perspective of someone in our generation who is navigating a father in one of those themes? Should it be from the perspective of someone who is a spouse who has identified these traits in someone that they're married to and wants to interject, or not interject, but kind of stop it there so it doesn't go on to the kids? Or should it be from the perspective of the man who says, you know what, because no one goes around saying like, I'm just an angry person. Like if you go ask people like, hey, tell me about yourself, no one says I'm an angry person. So they don't recognize it in themselves, right? So there's also that perspective where we can talk about it to help people understand, because from my experience, all those themes, all those guys, right, they think they're doing what's needed. right?
Right.
They're not seeing it of like, I'm emotionally unavailable and I'm intentionally like trying to screw up my kid, right?
Right.
Like they have full on real justifications of why this is right. And for someone to actually effect change, it can't be in like a shouting match of like, you're angry, go see a therapist, right? Like
Absolutely.
that's not going to work. So what do you think about approaching this from the perspective of, say, someone in your life or even you has identified like this is kind of similar? What are the things we do now and how do we approach it so that we can actually be productive as opposed to, you're angry, I can't deal with this, or you're angry, it's affecting me, or you have issues, right? Like that's a lot of finger pointing. And
Mm,
I've always thought that to actually solve things, like you have to collaborate, right? Like
yeah.
you've got to show up and they've got to show up and you got to work together in a
Absolutely.
non blaming way, right?
Absolutely.
It was,
And yeah, and I just want to preface that I didn't want to put those things out there for to make anyone feel
yeah, yeah,
blamed or and if people feel seen in some of those men, that's 100% legitimate, and it's good on you to see that within yourself. And I think I love what you're saying about, how can we sort of help, like give some help, provide some direction, or kind of move the conversation forward.
yeah,
Definitely not for accusation purposes or to feel bad or feel targeted.
yeah,
Absolutely not. I think yeah, it could be shocking for people to hear,
Sure.
oh, I do that, like,
yeah,
or I know someone who does that. And I think, yes, this is 100% for like, why is this happening? How is this happening? What can we do?
yeah,
Sure.
I think for the why is this happening, I think there's a lot of obviously reasons going on, right?
hmm
Like there's the home environment from before. There's, coming as an immigrant, if we're strictly talking about immigrants, South Asian parents, it's
Hmm.
a lot. And I think I love that you said, people just did what they thought was best,
right,
right? I mean,
Yeah.
you're coming in as a South Asian male, having to sort of be the success story of your family in this country and figure it out,
Hmm.
language barriers, daily stressors whether it comes to racism, whether it feels like you're put in an inferiority position compared to what you were in a South Asian country. Let's say you're like a CEO, you're a doctor,
Hmm.
you're a boss. I mean, medical people have to start all over sometimes.
yeah,
It's a lot. You're
Yes.
literally straddling so much
Yeah.
between the old culture and now this new environment. And granted, you chose to come,
yeah,
not like African Americans. We chose to be here.
yeah.
But I don't think people recognized at the time of all the immigration that it would be this challenging. You just think you can come here and sort of make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't even
It's
think about, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Like,
it's hard for us even to think about moving to another state. Like,
yes,
Yeah.
we've thought about moving to Florida many
yes,
times, and that's a monumental like thought to even hold of moving from DC to to Florida, where we'd still be a mile away from McDonald's, right?
yes.
But what I want to just comment on what you said about sort of they were doing the best they can, right? And one like non-inflammatory example is I told you my family's traveling right now. And so my son's birthday is on Monday, and he's gonna come home on Sunday. And one of the things I do, it's kind of a weird quirk. I like to play things out. People call it manifestation. People call it visualization. So I kind of like to play out how his birthday morning is gonna go, right? And I was laying in bed this morning, and I played out sort of kissing him on his cheek, like full
Mm.
on, like puppy, right? Like sucking on his cheek and leaving it slobbering, right?
So good.
And I love kissing my kids. Like I just love kissing them. But I don't think I ever remember my dad ever kissing me. And I don't think a lot of men of my parents' generation showed affection, even to their wife or their kids or daughter or whatever. And as you were talking, I'm thinking like it has to be that something along the lines when they were growing up, like showing love, showing affection, um, meant that you were weak or vulnerable or something like that, right? So even now, my dad's 86, and I go home and I'll give him like a side hug, right? Um, like shoot me if I ever give my son a side hug,
Yeah.
right?
Like, yeah.
like I'm holding his face. I'm like
Oh, yeah.
slobbering on
My
him.
dog is so funny.
Yeah.
It's so awkward, right? Because you're like, oh, hey, but I agree. I mean, I remember I woke up, I would spend the night at my friends' houses, right? And I would watch their parents be like, I love you, and sweetie, and honey, and like kisses go all around, right? And good mornings would be these big bear hugs. And my parents, I remember my mom being affectionate more so than my dad. But I remember being like 7 or 8 and asking my parents, like, why don't you ever say I love you? And my dad looked at me and was like, what did you think, that we don't? Like he
Mm.
couldn't fathom the idea that like I was the one that was delusional, right? Thinking that he didn't love me, when in reality, like, of course it looks like that because you're seeing such a cultural difference, right?
Right.
For them, it's like, we're showing you, we've
Right.
we've brought you here, we've done all these things. It's
Yeah.
all the language of love is, giving, doing, providing,
Sacrificing,
sacrificing,
martyring, almost
Yeah.
like,
Martyring.
yes.
Exactly, 100%. And then words are fluff, I think.
Mhm.
I think they see it as a Western kind of concept,
Mhm.
because
Right.
Americans just talk, or your English people just talk. There's no substance behind
Yeah.
it. Look what
Mhm.
we're doing for you.
Yeah.
All these things. So I think that's part of it. I think, they never grew up with affection in their place. I think you're right about there's something, the vulnerability piece is giving away your cards too much.
Yeah.
I think with just generally, and then it just sort of filters into family relationships too. I think that whole thing of like, don't express, keep it, sort of together, grin and bear the pain, keep, everything is sort of connected, I think, related to that idea of vulnerability, which is, I think, an intergenerational traumatic event. I don't know what the event would have been. Maybe it's partition, maybe it's earlier than that.
Mhm.
If it just, that's my little thesis, if it like trickled into, just like they did the Holocaust survivors and the
Right.
panic attacks and things like that, I'm wondering if this script of like, it helped to just keep a lid on it. Obviously, during colonialism, you had to sort of fawn and please,
Right.
and just
Right.
do what the white man told you, and then you would be in good books. I'm just wondering if all of these things of oppressors sort of made this thing of like, don't do anything extra, don't put on any, express much, because you could get in trouble.
Yeah.
Maybe there was, so I'm wondering if that trickled over time.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I've never thought about the partition even playing a role in any of this. Of course, I mean, to me, it makes sense that it would. But my reflection on what you're saying also is, because it's right now we're talking about our dads, right? Like our uncles are this and are that. But I also, I see it in our generation, right? I see things in how my husband does things as a reflection of like how he was brought up. And we're now working through how to do things differently. And I see it in my brothers-in-law as well, right? These are dads they wanted to be dads. They're excited. They love their kids. Like Dinesh, they're loving on them and they're, coaching basketball and, all of these things. And also I see very, very much how as soon as the kids kind of start to do normal kid things, particularly the boys, right? Particularly my nephews, particularly my son, that's when it's triggering almost for these men. And it's just an interesting sort of like, where did this come from our parents, and now what do we do with it in this generation?
Sorry, so you mean like, tell me what's triggering? Like, I just kind of
So say
Yeah.
the just normal kid stuff, right? Like you sit in one place and you eat, like a big boy, and something spills, right? Or not first time listening, and no one's flying off the handle. But I do see that the reaction is still more so than it really needs to be, given that they're just kids, right? A little 4-year-old, a little 8-year-old, even my own son, who's almost 13. I'll be the first to say, like, there are times where I find myself thinking, like, why haven't you figured this out yet? And I have to remind myself, well, his brain is soup, right? It won't be fully developed until maybe 25.
And there's a lack of knowledge around all of that, right? I mean, that's just the bottom line. People have been having babies for eons, but it's survival of the fittest over time, obviously. But now it's just become sort of an autopilot kind of doing. But we're doing much better because of, I think, some of these things that we have experienced in our childhoods, to have the luxury of, reading about parenting books now, and like, talking with our friends and being able to think, especially for guys, to have guy groups. I mean, we need more of those, and we'll talk about it, but like to be able to, like, I experienced this and it was not fun, and I don't want to bring that part of myself. It takes a lot of self-awareness.
Yeah.
And that's, if we're talking about, like, you asked the question, how can we sort of move this conversation forward? It takes awareness on the part of, the spouse, to say, this, I can handle this with some sort of professional help. Or, if you're going to collaborate with me, if we can work together, if you can own what's happening here, absolutely, there is, a beautiful transition that can happen, and transformation that can happen. But it's a matter of, like, really letting go and owning our old scripts. We got to own this stuff when we see it in ourselves. And that's why I say the South Asian male, it's not just, yes, it starts there because of I mean, for me, I feel like it has a huge significance. It kind of infiltrates the whole family system because of just the very fact that you're a male. You have the power, right? So you set the tone sometimes in families, in our older generations. But it's now our responsibility. If I have an anger issue and I'm a woman and I've learned this, what can I do now? Instead of sitting there saying, oh, I got this from my dad. Okay, fair enough. But now what am I doing with it? I think a lot of times we try to blame, right? Or just say, this is how I was born and I don't know what to do about it. I think that's really important. We all have a responsibility to think about our own mental health, our own mental well-being, and how we show up in our families, how we sort of impact relationships and dynamics. And going forward, I love that you kind of love on your kids. I think that's really important, right? I mean, a lot of kids didn't grow up seeing that, as you said, Seema. I mean, a lot of people, we didn't grow up, all of us, seeing some of that, and just expressing. I think for men and parents to express and get validation. That's the other thing that kind of some of the research talked about. There was a research in the UK about, even if, and I think for non-cisgendered men too, even if you wanted to express, it was interpreted as something that the person interpreting it saw it as. So, if you were feeling pain and you wanted to express it, they would misinterpret it as anger or something else, right? And, it's a lot of sort of recognizing what your actual emotion is and having a safe space to let it out. So if your partner is that safe person, or, a friend, I think guys getting together at a bar to talk, rather than just let's get trashed when we're feeling not so hot or not so great, right? That's a whole nother thing. Coping with substance use happens.
So good. So good. But let's maybe shift a little bit from the guy's perspective, right? And I think I can represent what I'm seeing in not only my life, but our friends' lives and the conversations. And after the show, I'll send you guys this little TikTok of this woman talking. And I think it's parody. I think it's a little bit of entertainment. But the sum of it is that men are tired because they have this expectation on them that has been placed on them to put everyone's needs ahead of theirs, right? And in very loose terms, what I've heard from some men that we're talking about in this demographic is that in my dad's generation, right, my responsibility was just to earn and put food on the table, right? The entire household responsibility, the kids, like the khandan, all of that was on the woman's part, right? Now, in like our peak earning ages, like in 40s or whatever, the expectation is to do 50% of the parenting and the household, right? And then there is no acknowledgement of the desire for certain lifestyle things, the Louis Vuitton bag, flying first class, the Italian vacations, things like that. And the conversation, it's been going on for a while with both men and women, is like, okay, let's just make up numbers, right? Let's say from 200,000 to 300,000 of earning power, right? The
Mm.
woman would say, well, we don't really need that extra money. I would prefer that you're more present in the house,
Mm.
right? That doesn't matter to me, right? I'd rather take a pay cut and make less money to be present in the house. And the man, I'm arguing merits. I'm just giving you perspectives, right?
Mm.
The man says, well, there's this dichotomy of I feel the pressure to do the best I can, and it's difficult for me to artificially hold myself back because I know I can provide better for my kids. I know I can help set up our retirement better. I know that if my kid wants to go to Harvard, I can maybe afford that tuition in the future. But it's difficult for me to pull myself back, right? And when I am juggling all of it and balancing it, and I've got a hard day, the minute like I try to do something for myself, it's perceived that I'm ignoring the house, right? And the extra effort that I did, or like, worked an overnight shift or something like that. That's kind of the genesis of the conversation that I'm hearing right now in
Mm.
various circles. And it's very different, I'll tell you. It's not the same based on profession or age or kids. It's very different after COVID because some men are working in the home
Mm.
and some men are not,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
Some men are like me. I work at home. Almost every day I'm at home. I can pick and drop my kids, and my wife works outside of the house. She works at the hospital. Whereas other men are traveling for work and
Mhm.
they're not around. So the conversation is like splintered. It's gone in a lot of different directions. And I know I've been talking a lot, but what I want to ask you is from the man's perspective, right? Um, Again, coming back, what can we say to them to help them realize of aligning their interests, basically? Like, we know what you're doing, we see that you're working hard, you want to
Mhm.
do that, but this is also why what we're saying is important and just can't be delegated or brushed away. Like, you can't outsource parenting to a nanny, you can't outsource fathering to a mother, right? Some people have to, single parents, things like that. But help us understand that dynamic so that we can start to align our interests of
Mhm.
trying to move the conversation forward. Whew, that was a lot.
That's a lot. I don't know how
Did
much
I
I can.
make any sense
That's a therapy session. Those are a
for
few.
me?
Those are a few therapy session
Yeah.
conversations, but I think you hit it with just the validation, just
Mm,
starting off by that recognizing, hey, like, and how does it serve them maybe, and honestly, how digging deeper to understand, like, all the work they're doing, how does it serve them,
mhm,
and also digging deeper to understand, you know, is this how they see life going forward? They have this, and all thinking about the gratitude and all the things that they have in front of them, like the wife, the kids, whatever, and how much of their time do they want to impact this child's life, like maybe explaining the idea of you can make an impact in your child's life
yeah.
by being that model to them, like explaining how your child is watching and going to go out and be a human and do their own things, and what would you want that child to take from being with you,
Mhm,
and that parent, almost like a positive, like helping them pay it forward type of thing. What do you want to give? What would you say your child sees now? And what would you want to make better for that?
mhm,
Mhm.
Keeping it in very positive terms. That might be something that's helpful,
yeah.
rather than saying, God, stop it. You're doing too much. We get it. You're amazing. Come back now. You're not doing enough at home. I
Mhm,
think it's like, what would you want your legacy with your kids to be? Or
mm,
like, oh, my dad was this and he showed up here, and like, and that also can bring joy, and it's sort of helping, because I think, to be honest, and I don't know if it's all I definitely, the previous generation didn't necessarily say, like, especially men,
yeah.
I want kids. Not everyone said that,
Yeah.
Right.
I think they were just, it's what you do.
Yeah.
Well,
Let's
there's
be.
something wrong if you didn't like, is there something wrong with you medically or not
Yes.
even medically, right? Like there's just something wrong with you if
Mhm,
you
Yes.
and your wife don't have
Yes,
kids.
exactly.
mhm,
And And I know now more, this is becoming a conversation of to have or to not to have. But point is, if you do have family and do have kids, recognizing that, the gifts you can give your child.
Mm-hmm.
What are those gifts? Yes, hard work ethic, amazing.
Yeah.
What else? Do you connect with your child? And if you don't, what's stopping you? Like, I think those kind of things, thinking about what's your favorite thing about your child or your wife? What's something that makes your wife so happy?
Yeah.
I think if you have conversations with other men, these are the type of questions, even to say, like, gosh, what would you want your child to remember you as?
I love it.
And then it's like, oh, you don't feel, they're not in the hot seat to feel bad about themselves. They're like, oh, okay, what can I do going forward?
Yeah. That's so good. So good.
So I think that, and you guys are the happy and human podcast. We want to keep it like very positive. So I think that's the way to go generally.
Yeah, I love it. Teach us teach everyone, not just men or women, teach us how to properly give validation, because sometimes when I do something and I'm told thank you for doing that, I'm like I feel cheesy needing to get a thanks or a praise. Like, I'm not doing it for that. And the validation doesn't land in the way of being right, or it doesn't feel right. And maybe that's just a personal thing, but I have a feeling that I'm not that off the reservation, and it probably affects a lot of men. We're not doing it for the praise or the thank you, but the validation is important. So what is the proper way to give and to receive validation when someone genuinely means it? And I'll give you an example. I was doing something for the house, and I let my wife know by text that I did this, and she wrote back and thank you for doing this, right? And I was like, oh, you don't have to say thanks, just a lot of things that need to get done. And then she wrote back and she said, thank you for doing all the little things, right?
Aww.
And like, that's great. I love it. The more I think about it, I need that. I think everyone needs validation.
Sure.
But what's the proper way to give and receive it?
I mean, I think it just depends on the relationship and the couple involved. But I think the main thing is to help people recognize they're seen. Like, they're seen. Like, I even eye contact, and text is lovely. I do that with my husband too. And I might go in a little deeper to say, no, I like that she said that. I love that line. Thank you for all the little things. Like, that's something that you don't really think about normally, right? Even for yourself, you may not have think about she heard me. Like, just people want to be seen. And I think just recognizing, putting things out there, like, I noticed you did this. I appreciate X, like being very specific. And saying, I know how exhausted you are, or I know how stressed out you've been. Recognizing their emotional state, being aware of their emotional state, and saying, well, you had this, but you went over and beyond. Anyway, thank you. I see that. That, I feel like for men is huge, because men are a lot of times, there's stress. Everybody's stressed. Let's be real. Okay, we're all stressed. But men hold it differently, physically in the shoulders, and it's there, right? So, and the idea is, and there's always in the background, I've got to show up, I got to do work, I got to, provide. I have this pressure behind me to do all these things, and then if you've done something that is whatever deserving of some, validation, it's always nice to hear, wow, she recognized that I've had a very crappy day. And she gave me my flowers for that, even regardless. It always feels good and to be seen in a way that's specific. I think it's keep it specific. And I think it's kind of matching their emotional state. So you are tired, or you look, like you could use whatever. Or if they're, let's say they're content or calm, and it's lovely to see you in such a good mood. And I want to add this to that you did this. And it was really lovely. I think matching emotion is really nice. And people feel held in that space to know that, wow, someone sees me.
That's a good tip.
Yeah. And I don't know if it fully answers your question, but that's kind of what I've been using, like validation from that perspective. And receiving it, I think, is always, we all feel like, gosh, why is my spouse or why is my family member saying thank you? Like, the first thing we want to say is no thanks needed. However, we're humans, and it feels it's really lovely. It feels like there's not a moment is taken for granted, right? So
Mm-hmm.
even though we can say you're my family, I can take you for granted. It's okay, but also recognizing that person is an individual on their journey doing what they need to do and still showing up and doing these things, that's appreciating it. So recognizing that for yourself, that it's okay for someone to give you that and to accept it. I think that's the hardest piece for a lot of men, is it goes with the emotional expression, right? And emotional ability to sort of receive,
Yeah.
because it's like, again, actions speak louder. It's all about action, right? So I think, just I don't know if I'm fully answering your question, but I
You
think
are.
it's the idea of just recognizing that it's 100% okay
Yeah.
to have moments where you're told good job, because you deserve it. This
Yeah.
action deserves it. And
Yeah.
we're humans in the sense, or we're very human in the sense that when we get praise, we want more. Whether it's a subconscious level, so we want to do that, do more and more to get it.
Yeah.
It's like a little bit of a dopamine hit.
Yeah.
And and there's chemicals that happen when we give praise and receive praise. A
Yeah.
little bit of serotonin happens, right? And
Yeah.
those are all happy chemicals and make you feel good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're the expert here, Jyotsna. So I'm just going to offer kind of my reflections. You can tell me, but kind of something that came up for me while we were talking about receiving validation and why it's so difficult. You touched on these themes that you see in South Asian men, right? And being told like you're never going to be good enough, right? Constantly being criticized, and being told like, no matter how well they do in school, if it's a 98 and not 100, you didn't do well enough. If you don't have kids, here's how you failed as a human being. If you don't get married, if you don't have this job, if you don't take care of your parents in the way that we feel you need to take care, like we're always sending these messages of ways South Asian men are falling short. And for men, women, and everywhere in between, I think that's generally true. But culturally, I find that it's so difficult, um, maybe to accept that praise because it contradicts everything we were fed growing up,
Hit the nail on the head. So,
right?
yes, absolutely. And we just can't believe. Yeah, it's very hard to believe.
Yeah, it's hard for the brain to reconcile. Well, wait, I grew up with this one paradigm, this operating system, if you will, and now you're telling me you're inputting information that my algorithm doesn't compute.
Yeah.
Right.
And so what do I do with that? And it causes, I've seen actually reactive, like I'm thinking of very specific family members where they get very explosively reactive. Like you try to praise them and they like go into the self-deprecating sort of like all the reasons why the person giving the praise is in the wrong, actually. And it's like, even if you're trying to do a nice thing and it kind of blows up in your face, right?
Yeah.
So there's that one comment, but then the other thing I wanted to sort of bring into the fold here is, even within this high achieving generation of South Asian American men, right? That we do have the Louis Vuitton bags. We are flying, business class. We're taking these vacations and getting all of these things. I'm also seeing a heavy sort of like, I don't know if I would call it dependency, right? But the alcohol, the drugs, all of that is going on maybe in a closet way. Is that really reflective of what you see? Because I don't see it that much. I just sort of hear it and I'm making assumptions based on half the information, not all the information, but is it something that you see that's prevalent within our culture? And then also too, what do we do about it?
Yeah, I just literally wrote an article about substance use. It was with two women that have shared their stories. They're both authors and influencers and that kind of thing. South Asian women. And absolutely, I mean, it's generally in the country, substance use is a problem, substance use disorders. And then when you get into the diaspora, I feel like it's something that's not talked about enough. And it's something that is almost seen as like like drinking and that kind of thing is almost like is kind of connected to like class and prestige and like and that kind of thing on one level. But I noticed South Asians, like especially in college and stuff, just want to just get trashed so hard, And I know that there's a genetic link to just for some people. I know for Asians, when they drink, it just they have a lower threshold. They
Hmm.
get drunk pretty fast.
Yeah.
So that's something to look out for. And then even in my in my family, both sides of the family, there's alcoholism. I mean, it's just there, and dependency, abuse, whatever. And I think it's been a long-standing sort of what do you say, anecdote to depressive feelings, to anxiety, to pressure,
Hmm.
to not be able to share and express in a safe, validating environment. I think
Yeah.
that, the women that I interviewed started at 14.
Wow.
Another woman
Wow.
I just talked to, a client, potential client, 14, was introduced. So I think, and there is a genetic component, obviously. So, and a gene that sort of kind of keeps you predisposed. And so it just, and if things are not talked about, if depression's not talked about in the family, it just kind of is the way, it's what you see, and then you kind of develop these things yourself.
Hmm.
Um, but yes, it is a concern. Definitely, it's something that I think needs to be talked about a lot more. Needs to be amplified. People need to be able to talk and share problems rather than use these as coping mechanisms,
Yeah.
because then you're leading into like addictions, and then even like getting into suicidal ideation. I know we didn't get into as much as that, but suicide rates for South Asians is it's going, it's been on the rise a little bit,
Mm.
especially for women, which is interesting. It has always been the white male that
Yeah.
higher rates for white males,
Mm.
but it's definitely a problem, because all of these things of not being able to sort of find an outlet properly,
Yeah.
and a safe space
Yeah.
to recognize what's going on within ourselves. And and I hear you about not being able to take the feedback of positive feedback, because it's like a core belief that you sort of have been given in
Mhm.
some families, right? Like
Mhm.
Mhm.
the disapproving dad,
Yeah.
like always trying to prove yourself. And even now, right, at this age in life, people are still like second guessing, imposter syndrome, all those things. Like,
Mhm.
am I really that good enough? Am I really? And when you hear it, it's like you kind of have to hear it many, many times to begin to believe it.
Yeah.
That's the sad part.
Mm.
Because it takes, like, as the Gottmans say, Gottmans are the pioneers for couples therapy. They'll say 5 positives to sort of combat
Mhm.
the negative, right? So
Yeah.
like
Right.
it takes a lot to change your core belief system. In cognitive behavioral therapy, we talk about core schemas and what you sort of
Mm.
are told in the very beginning.
Right.
And you try to like find everything to support that core schema. See, I'm not good enough. See, I'm not
Mm.
worthy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it changes. And when somebody's challenging that, you have a hard time believing it.
I
Mhm.
see. A lot as you were talking, a lot of, sort of the four schemas and what we were told might be it's just coming to me now, might be this conflict because as South Asian males in our 40s or 50s or 30s, many of us were probably told that it's our responsibility to take care of the parents, right? Sort of what came out of India, where the parents moved in with the eldest son, things like that. And there is this inherent conflict because now we have this desire to spend time with our kids, right? And so there's this conflict that maybe there aren't a lot of avenues for understanding that conflict because we don't see a lot of it around us. People don't talk about it
Sure.
necessarily. And um, we're not really sure how to go about because if we were in India, like if we were in India 50 years ago, you would see that okay, well this is how it works. I get a house and or I get married, I move into my parents' house and we all live under one roof. And here now we're in different states and we want to coach baseball, we want to show up, we want to help in the kitchen and do pick up and drop off and play video games and all that stuff. But we also are in the sandwich generation and aren't quite sure how to handle all of that. Um, and one thing that you said about alcoholism and substance abuse and things like that, I think the most powerful thing for affecting behavioral change in South Asian men are frankly other South Asian men. And,
Mhm.
the influences that my friends have had on me, and, I've got a really good friend who uh, will give up alcohol, right? And will push himself and do, 75 hard and things like that. And those things trickle to other people around, right? Like you're at a
Yeah.
party and you're like, well, I'm not drinking right now. I'm
Yeah.
starting 75 hard tomorrow, right?
Love it.
Um,
Yes.
that that actually is so effective to changing the pattern, right? The template of, well, I need to have a drink to relax, or I had a long week, so I deserve a drink, or whatever it is, right? Because it's really sort of intrinsically elevates the standard for us.
Yeah.
What do you
That's
think about that?
I love that, and I know that there are on social media some folks trying to do things like this, where it's like men's circles, or therapists are doing it, and other South Asian males that feel it's important. South
Yeah.
Asian therapists. We need to do more, and we need to do it for, I think, all age groups, right? Like, I think it's a beautiful thing. And it's also like, yeah, when you see, I love that, the 75 hard, because it sounds, kind of a cool thing to be a part of.
It's
It's
alpha,
couched in that,
right? It's
exactly. And it's
alpha.
Can someone explain what that is? Because I don't know.
So yeah, 75 Hard was developed by a guy named Andy Frisella. He's a CEO of a supplement company, First Form, and what he developed, and it's sort of gone through iterations, but for 75 days, you have two workouts of 45 minutes each. One of them has to be outdoors, rain or shine, snow or wet. One of
Okay.
them has to be outdoors. You have to read like 10 pages every day. You have to drink like a gallon of water every day. And there's one other thing. What is it? Do you know, Jyotsna?
No, I don't remember, but yeah, I remember some of
It's like
the,
an intensive, like a cleanse
yeah,
almost, but
sounds like,
yeah.
so like breathing and stuff. I don't know if that was part of it, but
Yeah.
But it's a program. Like you have to do these things and it's a commitment to your betterment, it sounds
but
like.
it just sounds very like just a cool kind of, and almost
Yeah.
like you're inserting like this group think paradigm
Right.
of just something. You're taking like the cool bar scene and flipping it on its head to be like, oh, but I'm doing the anti of that, which is,
Right.
and join me. And
I
yeah,
mean, I think even the name is interesting.
yes,
75 hard. Like
yeah,
to me, that would never not never, but it wouldn't draw me in as much as it might my oral surgeon friends, right? That are
Yeah.
male and are like 6'5" and built and whatever, like it's not 75 intensive. It's not 75 focused. It's not,
the language
the
is,
language even.
yes,
Like, what is that about? It's
yes,
so interesting.
yes. I mean, I could see like men jumping for that. Like it's just a neat thing to be a part of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like that it's, and these are some of the things obviously that we need to be doing. Going back to Dinesh's point about South Asian men helping South Asian men, like, people want to see themselves or see, other people kind of that are in the same boat. It's always that way for any of us, right? But especially in this scenario, immigrant kids and millennials and that kind of thing,
Mhm.
having those shared experiences is
Mhm.
huge, and it's
Huge.
so
Mhm.
gratifying,
Mhm.
validating. And it's, you just feel seen and heard right away. That's why also in therapy, I think for, people coming to therapy, they want a South Asian therapist, or if they're South Asian, they want, sometimes want a female, or they want a male.
Mhm.
Men who want to talk to South Asian, psychologists that are male, makes sense, because you can sort of speak to an experience that may not be captured by, someone else,
Mm.
for sure.
Mhm.
And that's going to help, with change, ultimately, all of these things.
One of the things you talk about, Jyotsna, is there are darker, like underbelly aspects to this, to not getting the support, not getting the help, right? Things like, yes, we talked a little tiny bit about substance abuse. But there are, suicides and other things, right? So can you just sort of touch briefly on what that looks like for particularly South Asian males,
Yeah.
and what you're seeing?
I mean, so I think the thing, just to harken back to what I mentioned earlier about how it trickles down,
Mhm.
the impact on like children, right? And then
Yeah.
and young adults is the biggest thing I'm seeing. First of all, like first and foremost, like just, dysregulation from a parent
Mhm.
impacts your kids 100%, whether it's abuse in the home, whether it's domestic violence, it's all that. And that is leading to depression. I mean, it's contributing to depression, anxiety, eating disorders, alcoholism, substance use dependency, all of it. It's all there. Yeah, the women that I interviewed, like their homes were kind of not kind of emotionally, in some ways neglectful.
Mhm.
Mhm.
For some, it's been, the abuse and that kind of thing. The other thing I'd say is, yes, for South Asian males, whether you're the parent or the young adult son or whatever it is, you're dealing with heavy emotions, and if you don't have an outlet for it, you may be going into suicidal ideation, meaning thinking, dreaming about being done, right, and leaving.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's very dark. And
Mhm.
also, the drugs, of course. I know a lot of South Asian men that are like, now they use it as a badge of honor. Like, I've done every drug in the book, but it's like, wow, like, really?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Did you need to do that? What is behind that?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and then, of course, affairs. That's another thing that's happening. I feel like more and more it's happening in our generation,
Mm.
like generations where, with that again, feel like there's an emotional stunting. They're not
Mhm.
able to like share. They maybe have seen this in their families, or they don't know how to maybe deal with the current situation they're having. Maybe they didn't want kids. Maybe they're not able to like cope with the baggage that their partner is bringing in. So
Mm.
it's like
Yeah.
two different sets of baggage coming together. She's dealt with her own, let's say if we're talking about a cis couple, you know, not to just keep it on cis, but that's my
Sure.
reference point right now. She's coming with her own baggage of maybe an unavailable dad, and
Mhm.
over coddling mom, and then over involved mom maybe, and then he's coming in with abuse from his family, at expectation disapproving dad. Like, there's explosions happening because no one's thinking about how to fix this and move
Yeah.
forward.
Mm.
It's just kind of like, why aren't you just a different person than your parents?
Yeah.
Why are you this way?
Yeah.
And it's like, we don't think about every day, every minute we are walking towards the script. We always say you end up
Mhm.
like your dad, you end
Yeah.
up like your mom, unless you really work on that.
Yeah.
So there's that. Yes, absolutely. And so then it's very sad when these affairs and things like that happen.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Or like,
I
yeah,
Yeah, no, I was just sort of thinking like it's a really a whole other podcast and we can't possibly get into it all right now, but just even layering in the lack of sex education
Mhm.
yes,
that we
yes,
offer, that we were offered as kids. And then like now for me, it's really uncomfortable to talk to my kids about this stuff,
yeah,
even though it's in their faces, right? Even my daughter at age 10, right? Like she hears the word sex all the time and it makes me uncomfortable, right? But at the same time, we have to sort of just recognize for the purposes of this conversation, um, it's everything that you said, plus the lack of knowledge, education, feeling empowered to talk about sex and what it means and how to
yes.
have that in a healthy way.
Right, right, absolutely. It's something that's a whole nother thing, I think, even for guys and for women. That's another layer of, could be stress, it could be expectation. There's a lot of expectation for things to go a certain way for men and women,
Mhm.
especially men. That's a whole
Mhm.
nother layer of things
Right.
that they carry. And if it's not going in that way, there's chemicals that can kind of
Mm.
sort of get, what do you say? You kind of are sitting with all of that, and
Mhm.
then it can lead into explosive anger and all those kind of
Mhm.
issues. Yeah, we didn't even get into fully explosive anger, but that's another area,
This is just, you're going to have to come back and talk, really do a deep dive
Yes,
because I know a
Absolutely.
lot of us are wondering it's explosive anger. That's a very real thing that
yes,
happens, I think, more often than we would like to believe. And I think that it's something that we would really do well to talk about simply because I love how Dinesh, you always talk about, recognizing that people really truly are doing the best that they
yes,
possibly can, the best that they know how to do.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean we need to be permissive about it. And it doesn't mean that there's not room for growth.
And I think that is what has kept it going in a lot of ways, right? Because it's kind of what you had said, Seema, earlier, much earlier in the conversation about this idea of like when dad comes home, everyone better button up and get ready. We don't know what kind of mood he's going to be in. Goes back to my thesis of setting the tone for the family because we are a patriarchal system. Yes, we're trying to be 50-50 now, but some of that stuff still is ingrained to like, you know, in women too, like, oh, please the husband in very whether it's more subtle ways now. Yes, we have feminism and feministic ideas and this and that, but we sometimes fall back on like what moms have done, tiptoe around dad, kids keep quiet, you know, like we don't know what kind of mood they're in. And I think what's happened though now is yes, that's happening, but there's also this, I don't want to stand for this anymore, so divorce is happening, right? And I don't want to put up with this, or and the husband not recognizing that this is something he should probably get help on and work through, and the family needs to work through.
So good. All of that is so helpful. And we've talked about the dads, we've talked about men, our generation. But before we start our wrap up, I want to ask you about the kids and the 3-year-olds, the 4-year-olds, the 8-year-olds, the 15-year-olds, because ultimately, like, you know, I look in the mirror and I'm like, you know, I am what I am. I don't think I can change. And a lot of people might think that, right? And what can we do as men and women, right? Whether it's changing our interaction in front of the kids or, you know, going to therapy and starting to work on our own issues, all those are on the table. But what else can we do directly to raise boys that are adjusted, well adjusted, are malleable, right? That they can navigate various situations, whatever life throws them, and not repeat the pattern and not, so to say, be, you know, grow up to be like their dads, right? And run the script, work towards the script. I guess what I'm asking, how can we start to plant the seed or arm them to do the work without it being doing the work, right?
It's a great question, and I feel like it's the $1,000,000 question of today. But I think, and it's such an important one. I think bringing your own awareness to your own sort of inner states and mood when you are dealing, every time you approach your child. I know that's a hard task, but like I think as much as you can when you approach your child, what tonally, what are you thinking? Like you could be like really in the midst of something, you know, like, what do you want? Or what do you want? Or kids are sponges. They can read. They can. They know. My puppy knows. My puppy runs away if I raise my tone. So, like, really thinking about that, having some self-awareness on, you know, just because I'm in this mood, they don't deserve. They deserve present me, 100% me, in the moment me, and the gifts I have to give. Don't forget the gifts you have within you, to the wonderful strengths that you bring to share for your children. And then, you know, and also a couple things, also like ownership. You mess up, you can own it to your child. I know Dinesh, I have a feeling you do this, but I think it's important for other people to recognize how amazing it is to when a dad apologizes to a child. My dad never apologized to me until he passed away in 2011, but he finally did, and it literally had me in tears because, you know, we had a rough relationship sometimes, and so you never own a lot of times that. So that is so powerful to like own when you take accountability for raised your voice when you didn't need to. If you've said something or did something or whatever, like recognizing that and sharing that is a modeling moment, because they're like, oh, wow, if my big dad, who I look up to, my father figure who I revere, because they do, is able to do this, then I can do it. Like, it's okay. You're giving permission to say, I can be this way in my life too. Teaching a little bit about mindfulness, like spending time with your child in whatever mindful activity, you know, all technology away. Let's just you and me get in nature together, or let's do a sport together. As much positive time you're spending with your child is also another sort of thing. I think for Seema, the whole idea of talking about sex, what are some ways you can sit with your daughter if there's a book that's comfortable that you can read together, or like, I don't know how old your daughter is, but
She's 10.
10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's tons of great books.
lots
There's resources out there that weren't there before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, they're going to hear about it as maybe you did as well. Cause I know I heard this from not my parents,
Yeah.
from like an older kid. And I would have liked to hear it from my mom, at least. I think you can absolutely recognize that they're going to learn it. And she probably already knows some stuff,
Mhm.
right? They know things.
Yeah.
So I think acknowledging that, not being fearless about it, to say, this is life and you're going to hear about these things. Let's talk about what you know. Tell me what you know already, and I'll try to help clarify. We can have this conversation, making a safe space, making an open door policy. Come to me anytime. I'm not going to shame you or blame you if you mess up.
Yeah.
I'm never going to, we're going to correct you. We're going to have to give you consequences at some point, but we're going to always talk about it together. And you know what? Maybe you can collaborate on the consequence if they're a little bit older, right?
Yeah.
What do you think you should get? What do you think should happen for you? Let's come together.
Yeah, a couple of books. If your kids are younger, Meditation for Kids by Tejal V. Patel, fantastic.
Okay.
Ages 4 to 8. Finding Om by Rashmi Bismarck. That's more of a story, but still really great way to connect with your kids. I'm going to do a shameless plug for my own book, Connected, Discovering Your Inner Guides, because I think it really, truly, it's nothing new in that sense, but I think it does a really great job.
I'm going to put it out there. I am working on a mini series, but nothing has come of it yet. We're got a draft and everything. We're talking illustrators, but it's about for 3 to 5 year olds right now.
I love it.
Oh, so needed.
It's about big feelings.
Yeah.
Simple story. Just, dealing with how dad or mom, and there is corrective moments, repairing moments where dad apologizes to son, which is really lovely. So things like that. Yeah.
So good. And then I know, Dinesh, I have a feeling you want to share a story. But real quickly for parents, just while we're on the topic of books, The Whole Brained Child, I think is fantastic. Fantastic. So
yeah. I do have a story. It's about apologizing to my son. He loves sports and he loves jerseys, and he really wanted this jersey. I think we were going to a game or something, and he wanted the jersey, and we were short on time. And we ordered the jersey, and it showed up in Amazon. And I was opening packages, and it's very hard to tell what's in the Amazon package. And so I got scissors and I cut. And as I was cutting the thing open, I cut through the jersey, right? And he was looking for the jersey. He was waiting for it. And I'm like, oh, bud, I was in a hurry, and I'm sorry. I cut through your jersey. And I was like, I'll drive to Dick's right now. I'll get another jersey. Not a big deal. We'll fix it. And the reason why this story is, I think, important is, had I not apologized, I would have carried with me some sort of baggage all day that would bubble up in some different way because I was feeling bad, and like I just didn't know what to do with it, and I was feeling bad, but I don't know what to do with it. And I realized in that instant that because I apologized to him, and because I took ownership for cutting through the jersey, it doesn't matter what his reaction was. Like he could have just ignored it or gotten angry or whatever. He could have done whatever. But what he did was like, it's okay, Dad. It's just a jersey. We'll get another one. Like that released a lot from how I was feeling. And so the reason I share that is that I think it feels good to apologize. I'm not saying that in a pejorative way that you should walk around saying I'm sorry all the time. I'm saying I'm sorry. But when you are in the wrong, it's incredibly liberating to take ownership, to whether you apologize or not is part of it, but take ownership, and then to not sit with the wrong, but collaboratively work together with what to do, because otherwise you're carrying around this really heavy, dark emotion that many of us probably don't even recognize that where it's coming from.
And then guess what you do with that? Sometimes if you don't know better, you're projecting something onto somebody else. Or your own, how many times have you guys experienced when somebody's feeling bad or guilty, and then they're just like sort of blaming you, blaming it on you, or like projecting, or, and it's not recognizing that, they're just dealing with this. It turns into something else. It morphs into something else. And it trickles into something negative. So that's yeah, you kind of set yourself free from
You
that.
do. And I think as a kid, like I remember my own feelings not being validated, right? Like
Yeah.
you broke something of mine that you're telling me I need to take care of it and value it and be grateful for it.
Yeah.
But you messed it up. I didn't mess it up. And now you're sort of like, you know, criticizing me for having these feelings of disappointment, or I'm not sure, are you going to buy me another one? I don't know, right? That's obvious to you as the parent, but not obvious to me as the kid. But I love that the reason Jayan probably didn't make it a big deal was because he felt, like Jyothsna said, like validated and seen and understood and valued, which is so important. It's what we didn't get.
And it's such a small thing. And it's such a small thing, but like you're setting the path. You're setting him up for, bigger things,
Well, I hope it shows him that, one, that you are going to make mistakes, you are going to screw up. And, I was actually thinking this morning that we don't fail enough, right? Like we don't, I mean, if you think about it, like for every 10 failures, you'll have one success, right? But if you really sit back and think, like, when was the last time you failed at something? And I don't mean like you feel bad or whatever, but you tried something and you failed. And as adults, I think for one thing that I try to model for our kids is that it's okay to fail. Like failures are not the thing to run from, right?
Absolutely.
The thing to run from is not putting in yourself in the opportunities to fail. But yeah, such a great conversation, Jyothsna. I feel like, do you have a podcast yet?
Don't. There's somebody who's asking me to do one with her, but it's a lot of work. Kudos to you guys. It's so much work, I know, to put something like this.
So
when you're
amazing.
having fun, though, when you're having fun, it's just, I mean,
but
the best.
you have all the things, like all the intangibles, all the tangibles. I think a podcast. Listeners, if you're listening to this and you want Jyothsna to start a podcast, reach out to us and we'll just like bombard her with all the requests to start one. I think it'll be great.
Yeah. And you have this manuscript potentially, right? That's in the book. Like it's so much good stuff coming from you. I cannot wait to see what Dr. Jyothsna Bhat has to say.
Yeah.
This has been such a pleasure. I really, really, I feel like we're old friends. Like it just feels very comfortable.
I think so too.
Yeah. Let's, and I hope we can meet up sometime live.
Definitely.
You know what, Dinesh and I keep saying this, listeners, we want to create an event where we get all of these guests together and, create something to where all the listeners can also meet these guests, because you guys really, truly change our listeners' lives. I cannot tell you how many times I've had listeners come up and say something really, really just amazing in terms of, you had that podcast guest on and now I know, to do this instead of that, or I never thought about my dad in that way and it made it easier to forgive him, or, whatever it may be. And so such an incredible thing. Yeah, for sure.
So let's have some fun. We've talked a lot about clinical psychology, South Asian males, but at the show, we like to, wrap up in a very familiar way. And it's a lot of fun. So you up for some fun, Jyothsna?
I'm always up for fun.
I love it.
Yes.
So we're gonna ping pong back and forth, Seema and I, and I'll start here. And we live in a world where we want impact now, right, Jyothsna? Instant gratification. So tell us something. It doesn't have to be related to your field of work or what we talked about. Tell us something that uniquely that we can all do today to make our lives a little bit better.
I would say laugh a lot more daily.
So good.
100%.
How? Do we just look in the mirror at ourselves and start laughing? That's the easiest way for me.
That works for some people. Yeah. I feel like, it's so cliche to say laughter is the best medicine, but it is such a lovely feeling to have a belly laugh, right?
Yeah.
So whether it's with your kid, whether you find people are always sharing YouTubes and Instagram videos and whatever it is.
Yeah.
Every day, make it a point to do that. Because the funny thing is, I was going to say something a little more profound, but I'm like, you know what?
I love it.
This is it. You got to laugh. Like
you
that's
gotta laugh.
You got to laugh.
Here's the interesting thing about laughing is if you see someone laughing, you cannot not laugh.
Yeah.
Right? Like if
Yeah.
someone's like just yucking it up and has a big belly laugh,
Yes.
you can't not laugh at them, right?
You're laughing just because you're laughing right now.
Yeah.
So,
I know, right?
Yeah.
Good stuff.
So true. I cannot agree more. So we also have on this on the show Ask It Forward, right? So
Oh, yeah.
our previous guest has left you a question, and we're going to ask it of you, and then you get to leave another question for the next guest. We don't know who it is or what they're going to be here to talk about, but
Okay.
we'll be able to ask them your question. So our previous guest was Sonia Chand, who is on the spectrum, is a former attorney, and is now also a psychologist. And her whole thing is about, normalizing autism. And so one thing she left for you to be asked is, what is it that really truly inspires you?
I love that. I think it is people that are living their full authentic lives. I think that's inspiring to see, like people that are just out there feeling, showing all sides, vulnerability, authenticity all the way through. Those kind of people, you could be like a homeless person on the street or, the most famous, richest, whatever. It's that authenticity, the vulnerability, and to be who you are in any circumstance, to be the same. That's inspiring to me.
I love it.
It's a good one.
I think for the question I want to leave, just kind of given our topic today, what does your own emotional language look like? What is working well for you, and what can you do better?
Wow.
That's a pay it forward to the community kind of question.
That really is. That's really truly is.
That's like, we're going to try to instigate some change.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's a great question. One of the questions one of my coaches in 2017 asked me is, what is your emotional home? And no one talks about this, right? Generally, we don't think about what is our emotional home and what are the top 3 emotions you feel the most, right? And it's such a simple question, but when you think about it, you're like, hey, 80% of the time is just 3 emotions out of like 4 billion, right? And then it also puts the power squarely in your hands that, wait, you mean I can feel different emotions? Like I have control over this? So I love this question because you can change your emotional home. You can change the type of emotion you feel well, and it's your responsibility. One of the things I learned from Brendan Burchard a long time ago, when you walk through doorways, right?
Yeah.
It's setting an intention how you want to show up. And when we started a law firm and at home, I found that I was taking emotions from the home to the office, and then that would react in a certain way, and I would bring emotions from the office home. So each life was dependent on the other life. When if I had a tough day, like, what does that have to do with our kids, right?
Yeah.
Or if I'm having a great day, does that mean like we'll have ice cream that day? And so learning to change how we show up was a tactical tool.
Yeah. Especially going back to like chalking it up to the Southasian dad who's like, oh, leave him alone, beta. He had a hard day at work. Like, that's such a great tip from both of you.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. So Jyothsna, you are amazing. I hope you realize just how incredible you are and all the stuff that you shared with us. And not only that, but the groundbreaking ideation and concept you're coming up with to really change the trajectory for South Asian families. So thank you for coming on the show. We can't thank you enough, but we have a little way of trying to thank you. We're going to try. And that is to raise awareness and to make a contribution to an organization that's near and dear to your heart, right? So it serves a couple purposes. One, it shares with our listeners different organizations that they might resonate with. Two, we make a contribution in a way to in your honor, to thank you. And finally, it's a way for us to make the Happy and Human podcast a vehicle that can impact people that maybe don't even know that exists, right? Because we're benefiting from it, you're benefiting from it, the listeners are benefiting, but what about everyone else, right? It's a small portion. What is an organization that you feel really aligned with that we can make a contribution to?
Well, I had a couple questions about that. I mean, there's 2 in my mind, but I wanted to, do you guys donate to India and things like that?
Of course.
Okay. So the first one that came to my mind, and is something, I don't know if you've seen this viral video going around. There's a 95-year-old woman dancing. It's been like just all over. She's Indian, an Indian 95-year-old Indian woman. I actually got to meet this woman
Oh, you did?
because she's in the nursing home started by my great aunt in India, in Chennai.
Ah.
And it is a really beautiful sort of way that they are giving back to these women that are, I guess you call them destitute, or like, you know, places. It's a family sort of oriented place for women to come and live their last, you know, parts of their life. And it's very, they've been trying to build it, make it bigger. I think they have about 200 women there now. And I've got to visit because it is like part of a family legacy, and it's just a really loving, beautiful environment, and the women are so lovely and so dear. And so I went there like 2023 with my mom, and I'm a dancer trained by Bharatanatyam, all that stuff. So
Nice.
immediately they pointed this woman out and said, "You guys have to do some dancing together." So we did. We made some videos, it just like for fun. And so I had shared that, and people were like, "Who is that lady?" And then lo and behold, like 2 years later, she's like viral.
Oh, wow.
And just dancing and that kind of thing. I'm like, I know her. But anyway, the more importantly is the work they're doing is very quiet.
Yeah.
And it's very full of like love and humility, and it's a beautiful place. It's called Vishranti in Chennai.